we began the arrest and trials of the night raiders and possum hunters. In the last part, we saw how the tobacco farmers felt anger and held grievances against James P. Duke and his American Tobacco Company for unfair business practices. Duke consolidated the tobacco companies into one company called the American Tobacco Company. Using this huge conglomerate, Duke was able to drive down the buying prices for tobacco, which left many farmers in poverty and bankruptcy. Not taking this lying down, the remaining farmers then consolidated into the Planters Protective Association of Kentucky and Tennessee. As we have seen, the PPA had their own issues, as they would use scare tactics, scourging, murder, and burning down personal and company property to make their voices heard. They temporarily captured entire towns, which included 3 county seats in Kentucky. The governor of Kentucky, Augustus E. Wilson, would step in and order the Kentucky National Guard to start protecting the county seat citizens from further harassment. Although this did keep the county seats safe, it took a while to rein in the rest of the townships and gain control of the Black Patch tobacco area. Duke did not go unscathed in all of this. He not only had to face the wrath of the farmers when they organized into the PPA of Kentucky and Tennessee, but he would also go on to face the Supreme Court for monopoly charges. Come with us, as the blind lady of justice will now have her time in this saga. The end of the war. Lieutenant Newton Jasper Wilson led Kentucky State Guard detachment against the night raiders in April of 1908. Several men were arrested and several key informants were protected. One of the protected informants was Macon Champion, who was a former night raider. Champion would implicate 15 other local farmers in connection with the raids. Most of the men were not convicted at the trial, but it effectively ended the Black Patch War. Because of the arrest that Wilburn had made, he was promoted from lieutenant to captain. Marshall County investigates the Birmingham night raid. Marshall County authorities did an investigation, and Burnett Phelps was the first raider to be brought to trial. African American victims were encouraged to sue for damages. By December 1908, 2 more men confessed to being lesser leaders in the raid and turned state's evidence. One of the men, Ed Fox, regretted his participation in the crime. Filled with remorse, he tried to use a pistol. His wife discovered him, and fighting for the firearm, Fox was shot in the stomach, and it killed him a few days later. The other witness also died by his own hand before he testified. The raiders of Lyon County tried to intimidate the judge in the case, and even conducted a raid on the town of Benton where the trial was being held. This outraged the authorities, who sought justice for the death of John Scruggs and his grandson. Dr. Emilius Champion of Lyon County was indicted for the murders and would serve a year in the Eddyville, Kentucky State Penitentiary. 72 defendants would go to trial for damages. An award of $25,000 in damages was given to L.A. Baker and schoolteacher Nat Frizzell, a share of which came from each of the defendants in the case. Both cases took only 5 minutes for the jury to return a verdict. Dr. Amoss goes to trial. After the arrest of Dr. Amoss, trial was set to begin in February of 1910. Dr. Amoss did face trial in Christian County, according to the March 11, 1911 Hopkinsville Kentuckian. Amoss and several others would face off in front of Circuit Judge John T. Hanbury. One of the main witnesses against Amoss was former night raider Milton Oliver. As the testimony wore on, one of the key witnesses, Milton Oliver, was shot in the left hip while standing in his front yard on May 25, 1910. The trial was postponed until the following year so that Oliver could recover from his injuries and finish his testimony. In the middle of June 1910, Amoss was indicted on violation of the Ku Klux Law, which stated that a group of people could not be armed and disguised for purposes of alarming or intimidating others. Oliver was asked the same questions over and over again by Judge Bush until the court ruled out repetitions. Oliver confessed that he had been forced to sign false statements to save his life, and even that did not protect him from assassination attempt. Several more witnesses came forward to point to Dr. Amoss as the ringleader for the Hopkinsville raid of 1907. The trial would last from March 8th through March 16th, 1911. Amoss would claim that he had an alibi during the Hopkinsville raid. He claimed that he was called to the house of William H. White as his wife was very sick and needed help of a doctor. All attempts to disprove this alibi proved fruitless, as well as Wally Jones, White's son-in-law, avoided answering the summons. However, Amoss was acquitted of all charges in March of 1911. He moved to New York City to practice medicine with his son until his death in 1915. Death of Axiom Cooper. One of the witnesses for the state was Axiom Cooper. In the middle of the Amoss trial, Axiom Cooper was shot to death at Tom Litchfield's barbecue on July 30th, 1910. Night raiders Roy Merrick and Vilas Mitchell, as well as 6 other men, stood trial for the deed in 2 separate trials of 4 men each. Because Commonwealth Attorney Denny P. Smith and Colonel E.B. Bassett felt that the jury was stacked unfairly, another jury from Cotton County was summoned. After all of the testimony, the 8 men were acquitted. Morgantown, Kentucky trials. The trials did not end with Dr. Amoss. According to the Hartford Herald, April 7, 1915, in Morgantown, Kentucky, evidence was being heard about the Possum Hunters organization. According to the testimony of a county official, that the Possum Hunters in that last fall had a membership of over 500 members in that section, and that 80% were possum hunters. They also said that they were not afraid of courts of law. The same man further said that, quote, if Judge Moss and Prosecutor Gillum came down here and tried to bother them, the possum hunters would make them swim Green River back faster than the boat that brought them down there, unquote. A further threat was made when it was declared by witnesses that the band intended to blow Morgantown off the hill if they were interfered with. Because of the threats that the possum hunters had made, the trial was being transferred to Warren County. It is unknown how this trial ended. The Hartford, Kentucky trials. These trials did not go off smoothly. According to the Daily Gate City on August 25, 1915, in Hartford, Kentucky, evidence would be given in the case against the Possum Hunters organization for threats made to intimidate witnesses. Those witnesses were prepared to give evidence to the state. Because of the threat level, Centertown became a garrison on the 3rd floor of a brick building where the 4 former members of the organization were being held surrounded by men with rifles. Those opposed to the Possum Hunters or who had just been marked by the organization for punishment walked around town armed for several months. Because of this fact, the members of the group backed down. 86 alleged members were indicted. The Possum Hunters were still holding meetings at night and instituted their own court of justice. Punishment included floggings and other methods to those that owed membership debts, displeased them in business transactions, or refused to obey their methods of regulating the community. 2 more confessions and convictions. According to the Daily Gate City on August 25, 1915, in Hartford, Kentucky, Jerry Clark and his son-in-law, Edward Tenchner, both confessed to being part of the Possum Hunter organization. They also admitted that they were part of a gang that terrorized the section of Kentucky. They blamed their actions on the Consolidated Tobacco Growers Association. They were sentenced to serve 2 years in the prison. Monopoly challenge and other aftermath. The American Tobacco Company was ordered to dismantle by the United States Supreme Court in 1911. In the case of United States versus American Tobacco Company, the court ruled that the ATC was a monopoly and it was in clear violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. By 1910, the war had ended except for some minor raids that happened in a few episodes. The tobacco farmers were now receiving more money for their crops, and an overall peace settled over the area once again. James Buchanan Buck Duke would go on to establish the Duke Endowment that would give 40 million trust fund dollars, equivalent to 632 million in 2021, to the school for a medical school, teaching hospital, and nurses dormitory on the Durham campus. Trinity College would be renamed to Duke University in his honor. The James B. Duke Library on the main campus of Furman University was also named after him. According to the codicil of his will, Duke would add another 67 million, equivalent to 1.4 billion in 2021, to the Duke endowment. While there was some convictions for the turbulent time in Kentucky and Tennessee during the Tobacco Wars, there were just as many acquittals. Was justice truly carried out for the victims? Only history can say for certain. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for supporting us as we bring to you the history of Kentucky and Tennessee.